and welcome back to Kim Reads. Welcome to the 6th and final story in the Kit series. Changes for Kit. Chapter 1, Something Wonderful. Something wonderful was going to happen. Kit Kitteridge knew it the minute she and her friends, Ruthie and Sterling, walked into the door after school. Mother was waiting for them in the front hall. "Here we are at last," she said, sounding cheerfully impatient. "Hang up your coats, then come join me in the living room." Mother and Kit turned to Ruthie and Sterling. "I wonder what's up," she whispered. Ruthie shrugged and Sterling said, "Who knows?" But Kit saw them slip smiles to each other, so she knew they were in cahoots with Mother. The children hurriedly hung up their coats, took off their boots, and rushed to the living room. Sterling's mother, Mrs. Howard, was there looking happy and fluttery. Kit's older brother Charlie had a smile a mile wide. Miss Hart and Miss Finney, two nurses who were boarders in the Kitteridge's house, simply beamed. Even Grace, Kit's dog, wore a goofy, drooly doggy grin. But no one looked happier than Mother as she came for Kit. "This is for you, dear," Mother said. She was holding up a winter coat. It was made of dark gray wool tweed flecked with blue. It had deep pockets and cuffs, 4 big buttons and a belt. "Wow," breathed Kit. "Try it on," said Ruthie. "See how it fits." "Yes," insisted everyone. "Go ahead." Kit had to say, "It's a beautiful coat," she said. "I really like it, but..." Kit knew her family didn't have a penny to spare. Her father had lost his business a year and a half ago because of the Depression. Ever since then, they'd struggled to pay the mortgage on their house every month. Kit asked, "Isn't a new coat like this awfully expensive?" Much to Kit's surprise, everyone laughed. "The coat isn't new," said Mother. "It belonged to Dad." Mrs. Howard piped up, "Your mother and I took this old coat apart, washed the material, cut it to size, and made a new coat for you using the material inside out," she said proudly. "Wasn't that clever of us?" "It sure was," agreed Kit, who believed that her mother was the cleverest in the world. It had been Mother's idea to turn their home into a boarding house. She had to go of it in spite of the hard times and the disapproval of her rich, grumpy old Uncle Hendrick, who was sure would be a disaster. There were 5 boarders now. Miss Hart and Miss Finney, a musician named Mr. Peck, and Sterling and his mother. Aunt Millie and the Bells had left. The rent the boarders paid helped the Kitteridges make ends meet, though they still had to be very thrifty. Kit grinned. "I like the coat even more knowing it's not exactly new," she said. "Good," said Miss Hart. "And you'll like our surprise too." She winked at Miss Finney and Ruthie. "Ta-da!" said Miss Finney. She and Ruthie presented Kit with a knitted red hat and blue and red mittens. "They aren't exactly new either," Ruthie said. "The red yarn came from an old sweater of Sterling's that we unraveled, and the blue yarn came from a cap of Charlie's that Grace chewed." "Unfortunately, Grace and I have the same taste in caps," said Charlie. He crossed his arms over his chest and pretended to frown down at Grace. But Grace, far from looking ashamed, seemed pleased with herself for her part in the creation of the mittens. She thumped her tail importantly. "Go on," said Ruthie. "We're dying to see how everything looks." Mother held the coat as Kit slipped her arms into the sleeves. Then Kit buttoned the buttons, buckled the belt, and pulled on the mittens and hat. "The hat goes like this," said Mother, tilting Kit's hat just so. "There," she said. "Perfect. Now turn around so we can see the whole effect." Kit spun around. Charlie whistled, Sterling clapped, and all the ladies oohed and awed. Kit blushed. She felt a little bashful about being the center of attention, but she knew that everyone was glad to have an excuse to make such a happy fuss. Back before the Depression began, when her family had plenty of money, no one would carry on about a new coat. Now it was something to celebrate. "Oh, look," said Mrs. Howard. "Everything fits like a dream." "And so stylish," added Miss Finney. "The coat makes you look really tall, Kit," said Ruthie with an approving air. "The whole outfit is very grown up." "I love it," said Kit. "Thank you, every one of you. It's wonderful, all of it." Kit held the collar to her nose and took a deep, delicious breath of the clean-smelling woolly material. She felt warm and cozy, all the more because the coat and hat and mittens had been made for her by her friends and family out of things that belonged to them. It was as if affection had been sewn into the seams of the stout wool coat and knitted into the hat and mittens to cover Kit with warmth from head to toe. She sighed a sigh of pure pleasure. "It was very nice of you all to make these things for me," she said. "Well, you desperately needed a new coat," said Mother. "Your old coat has been too small for 2 years now." Kit had a sudden thought. "Mother," she asked, "do we need my old coat, or are you planning to take something apart and make something out of it too?" "Why, no," answered Mother. I don't think so." "Then may I give it away?" asked Kit. She explained, I keep thinking about the children. Sterling and I saw the hobo jungle last summer. This cold must be terrible for them." The summer before, Kit and Sterling had gone to the hobo jungle, which was the place by the railroad tracks where hobos camped. Kit had been surprised and saddened to see a whole family there with little children. Many times since then she'd wished she could do something for the hobo children. Their shoes were so worn out and their clothes were so thin and ragged. Now she asked Mother, "Would it be all right if Sterling and Ruthie and I went to the jungle this afternoon? Maybe there's a girl there who needs my coat." "I think that's a very good idea," said Mother. She turned to Mrs. Howard and asked, "Is it all right if Sterling goes too?" Mrs. Howard nodded. "As long as they stay away from trains," she said, "and come home before dark." "We'll be back in time to do our chores before dinner," Kit promised. "Hurry along then," said Mother, "and Ruthie, be sure to stop by your house and ask your mother for permission too." "I will," said Ruthie. Kit folded her old coat over her arm as Ruthie and Sterling put their coats and boots back on. Then the children went outside, bundled up against the February afternoon. Kit smiled. She hardly felt like the cold snug as she was in her not exactly new, wonderful winter coat and hat and mittens. Ruthie's mother gave Ruthie permission to go. She also gave the children a sack of potatoes for the hobos. And the children took turns carrying the sacks. They walked through town and past the front of the Union Station. Kit was sure of the way. But when they got to the spot next to the river where the hobo jungle had been during the summer, it was deserted. "Where'd the jungle go?" asked Sterling. "Are you sure we're in the right place?" asked Ruthie. Kit looked around. Not one tired hobo was lying asleep on the ground with his hat over his face, or resting his weary feet, or repairing his travel-worn shoes. There were no tents or rickety lean-tos propped against the trees. No hungry children eating stew. No clothes spread on the bushes to dry as there had been in the summer. There was no fire inside the circle of stones on the windswept bare ground. No scent of coffee, no music. All was oddly quiet. "Hey," said Sterling, "look." He pointed, and Kit and Ruthie saw smoke rising up, dark gray like a pencil squiggled against the pale winter sky. The smoke was coming straight out of the ground. Kit looked more closely and saw that someone had dug a cave-like shelter in the embankment under the bridge. There was even a door built into the hillside. "Come on," Kit said. She knocked on the door. A man with a weather-beaten face opened it. "Yes?" he asked. His gruff voice reminded Kit of Uncle Hendrick. "Excuse me, sir," Kit said politely, "but where are all the hobos?" "Someplace south, if they're smart," said the man. "There are 5 of us living in this cave, and we don't have room for any more." "Well, what about the ones who are riding the rails?" asked Kit. "Lots of people camped here last summer when they were passing through town." "Huh," harumphed the man. "Don't you know this is Cincinnati's coldest winter in 29 years? Folks freeze to death camping out. Most hobos who are passing through here go to soup kitchens or missions. Sometimes they can stay for a night or two if they do chores. Then they have to move on." "Oh, I see," said Kit. She thanked the man, and Ruth gave him the sack of potatoes. Then Kit, Sterling, and Ruthie walked to the soup kitchen on River Street. They once delivered a Thanksgiving basket of food there, so they knew how to get back door to make their delivery. They went inside and carefully made their way past the stove steaming with pots of soup, around the busy people making sandwiches and coffee, and through the swinging door to the front part of the soup kitchen where the food was served. The three children stopped still and stared at the crowded room. An endless line of men, women, and children shuffled in the front door and past the tables where the soup, bread, and coffee were served. Every seat at every table was taken. So many people had to eat standing up. Groups of people, grim and gray, were gathered in the corners. Families huddled together wherever they could and spoke in low murmurs. Somewhere a baby was crying. So many people, thought Kit sadly, young and old, and also hungry and poor. Kit knew that only luck and chance separated her family from those she saw around her. Almost 2 years ago, her own father had come to this very soup kitchen to get food for the family because he had run out of money. That year, they fell so far behind in paying the mortgage that they would have been evicted, thrown out of their house, if Dad's Aunt Millie had not rescued them with her life savings. Things were better for Kit's family now, but the depression had taught Kit that nothing was certain. Everything could change suddenly. She could find herself standing in line for soup, just like these children. It made Kit's heart hurt to see them. One child was wearing a filthy, worn-out, threadbare coat that was much too small. Another wore a ragged overcoat that dragged to the ground. One even wore a blanket tied around his waist with a rope. Their shoes were even worse. Some of the children had nothing but rags wrapped around their feet. Others wore broken-down boots with no laces, rubber galoshes they lined with old newspapers, or too small shoes with the front part out so their toes poked out. Ruthie tugged on Kit's sleeve. She had nodded her head toward an area where people were sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. "There's someone who needs your coat," she said. At first, all Kit could see was what looked like a pile of dirty rags. When she saw the girl's thin, pinched face above the rags, and she realized that the rags were the girl's skimpy coat, or what was left of it. It was badly stained and torn. The pockets had been ripped off and used to patch elbows, and all of the buttons but one were gone. The little girl was cuddled up against her mother. Her hair was tangled, her eyes were dull, and she somehow seemed as lifeless and cuddleless as a shadow. Ruthie, and Sterling went over and quietly stood in front of the girl and their mother. Kit held out her old coat. "Ma'am," she said to the mother, "may I give this coat to your little girl?" The woman didn't answer. She looked at Kit as though she didn't quite believe what she had heard. The little girl stood up, shyly, eagerly. She took the coat from Kit and put it over the ragged one. She smoothed the front of the coat with both hands, and then she raised her face to Kit. In that moment, something wonderful happened. The little girl was transformed from a ghost to a real girl. She shrugged herself, and her pale cheeks glowed. "Thank you," she said to Kit, smiling a smile that lit her whole face. Kit smiled back. "You're very welcome," she said. She could tell that the little girl felt the same way she had felt about her new coat. It warmed her both inside and out. Bright, brilliant streaks of pink and purple were splashed across the late afternoon sky as Kit, Ruthie, and Sterling walked home from the soup kitchen. "Kit, you are like that fairy godmother who turned Cinderella's rags into a ball gown," said Ruthie, who liked fairy tales. "You gave that girl her own old coat and whoosh." She waved an imaginary wand. "You changed her." "Maybe," said Kit, "but that was just one coat and just one kid. Every kid there needed a new coat. And shoes." "Those poor kids," said Ruthie, "having to sleep on the floor. It's terrible that there's no better place for them to stay. Isn't there anywhere their parents could look for help?" "I think," said Sterling, "they are looking for help. That's why they're on the road. Maybe they heard about jobs in New York or California. Or maybe they ran out of money and lost their homes. So they're traveling to friends or family hoping to be taken in. They don't have any money for train fare, so they have to ride the rails. They can't pay for a hotel, so they have to eat and sleep at soup kitchens for a day or two. Then they're on their way again. In the freezing cold," added Kit, "in their ragged coats and worn-out shoes." She sighed. If only she had 100 coats to give away and 100 pairs of shoes. That would be wonderful. Kit and Sterling said goodbye to Ruthie at the end of her driveway and arrived home just as dusk fell. Kit went straight to work during her evening chores. As she fed the dogs and the chickens, they still have chickens even though Aunt Millie left. Scrubbed potatoes and set the table for dinner. She remembered the hobo in his cheerless cave and how people in the crowded soup kitchen. How lucky I am, she thought. Her house might not be fancy. In fact, it was getting rather shabby. But it was warm and filled with good-hearted people who cared for one another. Dinner was jolly that night. Afterward, Mr. Peck played his bass fiddle, and Charlie played the piano. They made music to do dishes by, and everyone sang along. Mother never used to allow the boarders to help clean up, but she had relaxed a bit and treated them more like family now. Sterling and Mrs. Howard sang as they cleared the table. Miss Hart and Miss Finney chimed in as they helped Mother wash dishes. And Dad and Kit sang in harmony as they tried. Grace, who never liked to be left out, howled. They were making so much noise that they didn't hear Mr. Smithens, Ruthie's father, knocking on the front door. They were surprised when he stepped in the kitchen. "Excuse me, folks," Mr. Smithens said. "I'm sorry to barge in, but we had a call for you on our telephone." The Kitteridges could not afford a telephone, so the Smithenses kindly took calls for them. It was Cincinnati Hospital, Mr. Smithens said to Mother and Dad. "It seems like your Uncle Hendrick had a fall and broke his ankle and wrist. They've patched him up and he's fine, but the nurse says he's making quite a ruckus. He wants you to come immediately and pick him up and bring him back here so you can care for him until he's back on his feet. I'll drive you to the hospital as soon as you're ready to go." "Thank you, Stan," said Dad. "We'll be right with you." Mother had already taken off her apron and put on her hat and coat. In a minute, she and Dad were gone. The door closed behind them, and Kit stood in a silence in the chilly front hall. Oh no, she thought, her heart sinking low and lower as the news sank in. Cranky, crabby, cantankerous Uncle Hendrick is coming to stay in our house. It'll be terrible. And that is the end of that chapter. See you later.